My name is Rachel Whitmore, and I'm about to tell you how a single forgotten clause buried in a decade-old contract brought down a billion-dollar empire. They thought they could erase 15 years of my life with a 10-minute meeting and a pathetic severance package. They were wrong. The fluorescent lights in the Titan Edge Group's newly renovated headquarters cast everything in a sterile, hospital-like glow. Where Vertex Dynamics once hummed with the chaotic energy of innovation, now stood a monument to corporate efficiency. The walls that once displayed our breakthrough product launches had been stripped bare, replaced with motivational posters featuring stock photo models in suits, their plastic smiles promising synergy and excellence through integration. I sat in my cramped cubicle, watching the morning ritual of the conquered. Former colleagues shuffled past with hollow eyes, clutching their rebranded coffee mugs like life preservers. The organic snack bar that had been Marcus's pride and joy, our co-founder's attempt to keep the team healthy during those brutal early years, had been replaced with a sleek juice cleanse station that nobody used. Even the air felt different, processed through some corporate filtration system that removed every trace of personality. My computer screen flickered with another integration update email. The language was always the same. Exciting opportunities, streamlined processes, leveraging our combined strengths. Corporate speak for, we're gutting everything that made this place special. I'd been through enough acquisitions to recognize the patterns, but this felt different. More personal, more deliberate. The young woman from the integration team had been making rounds all week, clipboard in hand, asking probing questions about workflow optimization and redundancy elimination. Sarah something or other, fresh from business school with her perfectly pressed blazer and practiced smile. She'd cornered me Tuesday morning, peppering me with questions about the infrastructure systems I'd spent years building. "So, Rachel," she'd said, consulting her notes, "it seems like your role has significant overlap with our existing DevOps team. Can you walk me through what makes your approach unique?" The way she'd paused before unique told me everything I needed to know. I'd given her the standard rundown, watching her scribble notes that would probably end up in some PowerPoint presentation titled Optimization Opportunities. But something in her eyes, a flicker of satisfaction, maybe, had set off alarm bells. That was 3 days ago. Since then, the signs had multiplied. Hushed conversations that stopped when I approached. Meetings I wasn't invited to anymore. Email chains that mysteriously excluded me. The classic pre-termination dance, played out in 1,000 offices across corporate America. I should have seen it coming. Hell, I did see it coming. But 15 years of breathing life into this company, of pulling all-nighters to meet impossible deadlines, of sacrificing relationships and weekends and my own sanity for the greater good. It creates a kind of willful blindness. You want to believe that loyalty means something, that expertise has value, that the people who built the foundation deserve better than to be discarded like outdated software. The phone on my desk buzzed, an internal call from Jennifer in HR, her voice artificially bright. "Rachel, could you come to conference room B when you have a moment? There's something we need to discuss." Conference room B, the smallest room on the floor, windowless and cramped, typically reserved for disciplinary actions and uncomfortable conversations. I'd been in there exactly once before, 3 years ago, when a junior developer had been caught selling company secrets to a competitor. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. I saved my work, force of habit, and walked through the maze of cubicles toward the conference room. A few heads turned as I passed, then quickly looked away. The modern office equivalent of villagers crossing themselves as the condemned walked to the gallows. The door was already open when I arrived. 2 people sat at the small table, a man I didn't recognize in an expensive suit, and Margaret Chen from HR, not Jennifer, who'd called me Margaret, who handled the serious stuff, the terminations, the investigations, the corporate executions. "Rachel," Margaret said, gesturing to the empty chair across from them. "Thank you for coming. This is David Kellerman, Vice President of Strategic Restructuring." Strategic restructuring. They weren't even pretending anymore. Kellerman looked like he'd been assembled in a corporate casting office. Silver hair, steel gray eyes, a handshake that was firm enough to establish dominance but not so firm as to seem aggressive. He'd probably terminated hundreds of employees, each one a line item in a spreadsheet, a cost to be optimized away. Rachel, he began, consulting a tablet. I'll get straight to the point. As part of our ongoing integration with Titan Edge, we've been evaluating redundancies across all departments. Unfortunately, your position has been identified as overlapping with existing capabilities in our infrastructure team. The words washed over me like white noise. I'd heard variations of this speech before, watched colleagues receive the same clinical diagnosis, terminal employment, prognosis, immediate. We're prepared to offer you a generous separation package, Kellerman continued, sliding a folder across the table. 8 weeks' salary, continued health benefits through the end of the year, and a positive reference letter, all contingent, of course, on your agreement to our standard non-disclosure and non-disparagement clauses. I opened the folder without reading it. The numbers were probably fair by industry standards, insulting by human standards. 15 years of my life reduced to a few $1,000s and a promise to keep my mouth shut about the injustice of it all. The effective date is immediate, Margaret added, her voice carefully neutral. We'll need you to pack your personal items and return your badge and laptop by the end of the day. Immediate. No 2 weeks' notice. No time to transition projects or say goodbye to colleagues. Just a sudden, violent amputation from the life I'd built. I looked up at Kellerman, who was watching me with the detached interest of a scientist observing a lab rat. Any questions? 1,000 questions. Why now? Why me? Why did you bother with the charade of an integration process when you'd already decided who to cut? But I knew the answers wouldn't satisfy me, and they wouldn't change anything. Just one, I said, standing up. When you're explaining to your remaining staff why their projects are falling behind schedule, what exactly are you going to tell them? Kellerman's smile was razor-thin. I'm sure they'll adapt. They always do. I walked out of that conference room with my head high, but inside, something fundamental had shifted. The naive belief that competence and dedication were armor against corporate cruelty had been stripped away, leaving behind something harder and more dangerous. They'd made a mistake, treating me like just another disposable asset. They'd forgotten that I knew things. I'd built things. I'd seen things. And most importantly, I'd signed things. The cardboard box sitting on my desk looked pathetically small for 15 years of professional life. A few personal photos, a coffee mug Marcus had given me for my 10th anniversary with the company, some technical manuals I'd authored, the accumulated debris of a career that had apparently meant nothing to anyone but me. I packed methodically, aware that my remaining colleagues were watching from their peripheral vision. Some looked sympathetic, others looked relieved, grateful that the corporate axe had fallen on someone else's neck. A few looked guilty, probably remembering conversations where they'd agreed that the integration was going well, that surely the valuable people would be retained. Tommy Chen from the QA team, no relation to Margaret, stopped by my desk as I was taping up the box. Rachel, I'm sorry. I had no idea this was coming. This is insane. Is it? I asked, looking around the floor. Look at this place, Tommy. Look at what they've done to it. We're all just obstacles to their vision of efficiency. He shifted uncomfortably. Maybe it's for the best. You're too good for this corporate bullshit anyway. You'll land on your feet. The casual dismissal stung more than Kellerman's clinical termination speech, as if getting fired was somehow a favor, as if 15 years of expertise and institutional knowledge could be replaced with a few lines on a resume. I carried my box to the elevator, nodding goodbye to the security guard who'd been greeting me every morning for the past 8 years. He looked confused, probably wondering why I was leaving in the middle of the day with a cardboard box. By tomorrow, he'd have forgotten I ever existed. The drive home was a blur of gray highway and grayer thoughts. My townhouse felt different when I walked in at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, smaller, quieter, more fragile. The mortgage payments that had seemed so manageable on a senior engineer's salary suddenly loomed larger. The retirement account that had been growing steadily for 15 years now looked inadequate. The future that had seemed so secure that morning had evaporated in a 10-minute meeting. I set the box on my dining room table and stared at it. 15 years. 3 failed relationships that couldn't survive the demands of startup life. Countless weekends spent in empty offices, debugging code and rebuilding systems. The slow transformation from idealistic young engineer to seasoned professional to, apparently, redundant middle-aged casualty. The laptop I'd surrendered had contained years of work. Code I'd written, systems I'd designed, documentation I'd created. All of it now belonged to Titan Edge, along with the institutional knowledge that had taken me 15 years to accumulate. They'd fired me and kept my brain, preserved in digital amber for their own use. I opened a beer and sat on my couch, staring at the wall where I'd hung my Vertex Dynamics Service Awards. 5 years, 10 years, 15 years of dedicated service. Meaningless now. Participation trophies for a game that had ended without warning. The job search websites were as depressing as I'd expected. Seeking dynamic young professionals. Digital native preferred. Looking for fresh perspectives. Code words for no one over 30 need apply. At 42. I was apparently past my expiration date in an industry that worshipped youth and disposability. I spent the evening scrolling through job listings, each one a small humiliation. Positions that paid less than I'd made 10 years ago. Startups looking for passionate developers willing to work for equity and dreams. Corporate giants seeking senior engineers who were mysteriously required to have expertise in technologies that had been invented last month. It was while digging through my filing cabinet, looking for tax documents and old performance reviews, that I found it. Buried beneath years of accumulated paperwork, a manila folder labeled Vertex Dynamics Original Agreement. Inside was a relic from another era, my original employment contract, printed on heavy paper stock and signed in actual ink. The document was dated 15 years ago, when Vertex was still a startup and I was still young enough to believe that hard work and loyalty were investments in the future rather than weaknesses to be exploited. I'd forgotten about the contract entirely. Standard employment agreements were typically superseded by policy updates and acquisitions. But as I read through the dense legal language, one section jumped out at me. A clause I'd never paid attention to, buried in the middle of page 7. Change of control provision, in the event of a merger, acquisition, or change of control of the company, and the subsequent termination of employees' employment without cause within 24 months of such change. All unvested equity options shall immediately vest, and employee shall be entitled to a severance payment equal to 1.5 times the value of said options based on the acquisition price. My hands trembled as I read it again. And again. The language was clear, unambiguous. If the company was sold and I was fired without cause, I was entitled to accelerated vesting of all my stock options, plus a 50% bonus based on the acquisition price. I grabbed my laptop and started calculating. Over the years, I'd accumulated thousands of stock options, most of them still unvested due to the company's long vesting schedule. At the time, they'd seemed like lottery tickets, potentially valuable someday, but probably worthless. I'd stopped paying attention to them years ago, focusing instead on salary and benefits. But Titan Edge had acquired Vertex Dynamics for $340 million. The news had been in all the trade publications, a major victory for our former investors. If the math was right, if the clause was enforceable, if they'd actually fired me without cause. I called my lawyer. Sandra Reeves had handled my divorce 3 years earlier, and she'd been ruthless in protecting my interests. She was the kind of attorney who smiled when she smelled blood in the water, who treated corporate malfeasance as a personal insult. If anyone could make sense of the contract, it was her. "Rachel," she said when I called her office the next morning. "I heard about Vertex. Corporate pigs. What can I do for you?" I explained the situation, reading the clause word for word. She listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Send me the contract," she said finally. And any documentation you have about the acquisition and your termination, if this clause is what you think it is, we're not talking about a wrongful termination suit. We're talking about a breach of contract that could cost them millions. The numbers were staggering. Based on my calculations, the accelerated vesting alone would be worth $7.2 million. The 50% bonus would add another $3.6 million, nearly $11 million, sitting in a contract that Titan Edge's lawyers had apparently never bothered to read. Sandra called back that afternoon. I've reviewed the contract and done some research on the acquisition. The clause is ironclad, and they definitely terminated you without cause. Strategic restructuring doesn't qualify as cause under employment law. They fucked up. Rachel, they fucked up big. So what do? We give them a chance to make it right. I'll draft a demand letter citing the contract clause and requesting payment within 14 days. If they refuse, we file suit. But honestly, I think they'll pay. The alternative is a public trial where they have to explain how they missed an $11 million liability during due diligence. The demand letter was a masterpiece of legal precision. Sandra had crafted it like a surgeon's scalpel, cutting through layers of corporate obfuscation to expose the naked truth beneath. She'd sent copies to the CEO, the general counsel, and the entire board of directors. No room for plausible deniability or bureaucratic delay. I waited. The 14-day deadline felt like a lifetime, each day stretching into an eternity of doubt and possibility. Sandra was confident, but I'd learned not to trust confidence. Corporate lawyers were paid to find loopholes, to minimize liability, to make problems disappear. They had resources and experience that I could only dream of. The first response came on day 3. A thick envelope from Titan Edge's law firm. The kind of expensive letterhead that cost more than most people's monthly salary. The message was predictable: denial, deflection, and barely veiled threats. They claimed the contract was superseded by later agreements. They suggested I'd violated confidentiality clauses by discussing the matter with an attorney. They hinted at potential criminal charges for theft of proprietary information. Standard corporate intimidation tactics, designed to make me back down and disappear. Sandra laughed when I forwarded her the letter. They're panicking. If they had a strong legal position, they wouldn't be resorting to scare tactics. They know they're fucked. The next response came from within Titan Edge itself. David Kellerman called my cell phone directly, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. Rachel, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Your attorney's letter contains some inflammatory language that doesn't reflect the professional relationship we've always had. Perhaps we could discuss this matter privately, without involving lawyers. I almost laughed. The professional relationship we'd always had, as if terminating me with 10 minutes' notice had been some kind of professional courtesy. All communication should go through my attorney, I said. I'm sure you understand. Rachel, be reasonable. You're talking about a significant sum of money based on a very old contract that may not even be enforceable. We're prepared to discuss an enhanced severance package that would be fair to everyone involved. Fair to everyone involved. The same phrase they'd probably used when they decided to fire me. Fair, according to their definition, meant I got screwed while they walked away with the company I'd helped build. My attorney will be in touch, I said, and hung up. The pressure campaign intensified over the following days. Former colleagues called, some genuinely concerned, others clearly fishing for information on behalf of Titan Edge. My ex-husband somehow learned about the situation and called to remind me about our alimony agreement. A reporter from a tech blog reached out, claiming to be working on a story about post-acquisition employee retention. I ignored them all. Every conversation, every contact, every attempt to reach me went through Sandra. She was my shield against their desperation, my translator for their corporate doublespeak, and she was enjoying every minute of it. They're hemorrhaging money on legal fees, she told me during one of our daily check-ins. 3 different law firms are working on this now. They're probably spending more on lawyers than they would if they just paid you. Then why don't they pay? Pride and panic. They're trying to figure out how many other employees have similar clauses. If they pay you, they might be opening floodgates they can't close. The deadline came and went without payment. Sandra filed the lawsuit the next morning, along with a motion for expedited discovery. She wanted access to Titan Edge's internal communications, their acquisition documents, their legal analyses of the employment contracts. She wanted to drag them into court and force them to explain, under oath, how they'd missed such a significant liability. The lawsuit made waves in the industry press. Former employee sues Titan Edge for $11 million over forgotten contract clause. Startup acquisition goes sideways as hidden liabilities surface. The $11 million oversight that could cost Titan Edge its reputation? Suddenly, my phone was ringing constantly. Reporters, headhunters, former colleagues, random strangers who'd read about the case online. Everyone wanted to know the details, to understand how a 42-year-old engineer had brought a billion-dollar corporation to its knees. I didn't talk to any of them. This wasn't about publicity or revenge or making a statement about corporate accountability. This was about justice, pure and simple. They'd tried to discard me like obsolete hardware, and I'd reminded them that some things have value beyond their immediate utility. The legal proceedings moved with surprising speed. Titan Edge's lawyers filed motion after motion, trying to dismiss the case on technical grounds. Sandra responded to each one with devastating efficiency, dismantling their arguments with case law and precedent. The judge seemed increasingly annoyed with Titan Edge's tactics, particularly their attempts to delay discovery. 3 months after the lawsuit was filed, I received a call from Sandra that I'd been hoping for and dreading in equal measure. "They want to settle," she said. "Full payment of the $11 million, plus your legal fees. In exchange, you sign a non-disclosure agreement and release them from any future claims." I sat in my kitchen, staring out at the garden I'd finally had time to plant. The tomatoes were coming in well, and the herbs were thriving, simple pleasures that I'd forgotten during my years of corporate servitude. "What do you think?" I asked. "I think they're scared. The discovery process has been brutal for them. We found emails suggesting they knew about the contract clause and decided to ignore it. Internal memos calling you and other senior employees dead weight. Board minutes discussing how to minimize severance costs. They look like the corporate villains everyone thinks they are. And if we don't settle, we go to trial. We air all their dirty laundry in public. We probably win. But it takes another year and costs another fortune in legal fees. And there's always the risk that a judge or jury sees things differently than we do." I thought about it for a long moment. $11 million. Enough to never work again if I didn't want to. Enough to start my own company, to fund other people's dreams, to make the kind of impact that Titan Edge had prevented me from making. "Take the deal," I said. The settlement was finalized on a Wednesday morning in downtown conference room that probably cost more to rent than most people made in a month. The same lawyers who'd spent months trying to destroy me now sat across a polished table, sliding documents across the mahogany surface with practiced professionalism. David Kellerman was there, looking like he'd aged 5 years in the past few months. He didn't make eye contact as I signed the papers, didn't offer the fake pleasantries that had characterized our original meeting. He knew, and I knew, that this was about more than money. It was about the fundamental fiction that corporations could treat people as disposable assets without consequences. The wire transfer hit my account the next day. $11,437,000, plus Sandra's fees, plus interest, plus a small vindictive bonus that she'd negotiated for the months of legal harassment I'd endured. I didn't quit. I didn't celebrate. I didn't buy a sports car or take a vacation to Europe. I sat in my kitchen, drinking the same coffee I'd been drinking for years, watching the same birds visit the same feeder outside my window. The money was just money. The real victory was simpler and more profound. I'd reminded them that contracts matter, that people matter, that 15 years of loyalty and expertise can't be erased with a 10-minute meeting and a corporate restructuring plan. My phone rang. Sandra, calling to check on me. "How does it feel to be a millionaire?" she asked. I thought about it for a moment. Like I can finally afford to tell the truth. And what's the truth? That I was never just an employee. I was a builder, a creator, someone who turned ideas into reality and problems into solutions. They tried to reduce me to a line item on a spreadsheet, but some things can't be quantified. What's next for you? I looked around my kitchen, at the garden outside, at the stack of technical books I'd been meaning to read for years. For the first time in 15 years, I had no meetings to attend, no deadlines to meet, no corporate politics to navigate, just time and freedom and the financial security to choose my own path. I'm going to remember what it feels like to build something for myself, I said. The non-disclosure agreement prevented me from discussing the specifics of the settlement, but it couldn't stop me from drawing lessons from the experience. I started consulting for other engineers facing similar situations, helping them understand their contracts and their rights. I funded a legal clinic that specialized in employment law for tech workers. I invested in startups founded by people who'd been discarded by larger companies, entrepreneurs who understood that innovation comes from passion rather than corporate mandate. Titan Edge's stock price recovered eventually, and they continued acquiring companies and firing employees with ruthless efficiency. David Kellerman got promoted to senior vice president, probably because he'd learned from his mistakes. The Vertex Dynamics office was eventually closed, its functions absorbed into Titan Edge's larger infrastructure. But the precedent had been set. Employment lawyers now routinely flagged change of control clauses during acquisition due diligence. Industry publications wrote articles about hidden liabilities and forgotten contract terms. Other employees discovered similar clauses in their own agreements, and a few more lawsuits followed. I'd like to think I'd made the corporate world a little more careful, a little more respectful of the people who actually do the work. But I know better. Corporations are machines designed to maximize profit and minimize cost, and employees will always be costs to be minimized. The difference is that now I was outside the machine, free to choose my own battles and fight them on my own terms. I'd learned that loyalty is a luxury that working people can't afford, that contracts are weapons that can cut both ways, and that sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to disappear. I kept the original contract, framed it, and hung it in my home office. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. A reminder that 15 years of expertise and dedication had value, even if that value wasn't recognized until it was contractually required. Sometimes, late at night, I wondered what would have happened if I'd never found that contract, if I'd just accepted the severance, updated my resume, and started the humiliating process of job hunting at 42. Probably nothing. Probably I'd have found another job, maybe for less money, maybe with less responsibility, maybe with the quiet understanding that I was lucky to be employed at all. But I did find the contract, and I did fight back, and I did win, and that made all the difference.